Elon Musk has just confirmed that Starship Flight 12 will no longer launch in March. The announcement came right as SpaceX rolled Booster 19 out to Launchpad 2, preparing for what could be one of the most unusual static fire tests we've ever seen. So, why is this mission slipping from its original timeline, and what exactly makes this upcoming B-19 static fire so different? Let's break it all down in today's episode of Alpha Tech. Oh no, here we go again. On March 7th, Elon Musk posted something that left the space community scratching their heads. He said, Starship version 3 first flight in about 4 weeks. If that timeline holds, it means Starship Flight 12 is now effectively pushed into the first week of April, possibly even later, somewhere between April 7th and April 10th. Either way, it means we'll have to wait a little longer than originally expected. And that's frustrating for a lot of people. Back in February, Musk posted twice on X, saying March was still the target for the next launch. Naturally, many fans were expecting the flight to happen sometime this month. Some were even planning trips to Texas, hoping to witness the very first launch of Starship version 3 in person. As it turns out, this updated timeline may actually trace back to Gwynne Shotwell. During interviews last week at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, she mentioned that the next Starship flight could happen in roughly 4 to 6 weeks. And honestly, this once again shows something many space watchers already know. When Shotwell talks about schedules, it often turns out to be more accurate than Musk's early estimates. After all, she is SpaceX's chief operating officer, one of the most influential leaders in the company. She not only helped guide SpaceX through its near-bankruptcy years, but also played a key role in turning it into the world's leading private space company. But anyway, Elon Musk's announcement came right before a massive step forward for this flight. We're talking about Booster 19, the very first Block 3 Superheavy booster, officially rolled out from Mega Bay 1 to Launchpad 2. It all kicked off on March 8th when SpaceX quietly moved the transport stand into Mega Bay 1. Everyone watching knew something big was coming. And sure enough, late that night, the building doors opened and Booster 19 started its slow roll toward Launchpad 2. The whole journey took a solid 6 hours, finally arriving early morning on the 8th. This is the first vehicle ever lifted by the chopsticks on Pad 2, and the first to sit on the new style orbital launch mount. First time out, and everything went incredibly smooth. Zero issue static fire for Booster 19 is coming up super soon. Who knows, maybe right while you're watching this video, they're already lighting up those Raptor engines. But hold up, this is going to be one of the most unique tests we've ever seen. Check this out. Booster 19 only has about 10 Raptor engines installed right now, instead of the full 33. Yep, that's right. It's set to static fire in this partial 10-engine config. Normally, SpaceX runs 1 to 3 static fires per booster. They start with a partial burn, maybe 10 to 14 engines, just to verify the whole system. Then they go full 33 engines for a short duration, around 5 to 10 seconds, checking thrust plumbing and pad infrastructure. But with only 10 engines right now, a lot of experts are saying this is exactly why the flight got pushed into April. Why, you ask? Just take a close look at how SpaceX is installing those engines on Booster 19. The process is far from complete. Engine number 87 still has this weird cap sticking out right at the top of the booster. And guess what? That thing doesn't show up in any of the official booster renders SpaceX has ever shared. On top of that, the 10 engines they've got installed right now are spread across 3 key rings: the inner ring right in the center, the middle ring, and the outer ring. This isn't random. They're picking a super intentional setup probably so they can fire all 10 at once and test different engine types or behaviors simultaneously in a single burn. It's all about making sure this very first V3 hardware doesn't hit any major snags before they commit to installing the full 33 engines. If something goes wrong during this partial test, they're only risking 10 engines, not the whole stack. That's classic SpaceX caution, ultra-high safety mindset in action, especially with brand new hardware and a debut on Pad 2. And yeah, it makes total sense when you crunch the numbers. A single Raptor 3 engine is estimated to cost up to around $500,000 right now. 10 of them. That's easily $5 million on the line just for engines. If this static fire goes smoothly, Booster 19 heads right back to Mega Bay 1 for a deep inspection. They'll check the engines, the propellant lines, all the plumbing, make sure nothing's off after that burn. Once everything looks good, only then do they install the full set of 33 Raptor 3 engines and schedule a proper full static fire. That whole process. It easily takes 1 to 2 weeks, maybe more, if they spot anything that needs fixing. We're probably looking at around March 20th before that's wrapped up. The last 10 days of the month. No way that's enough time to stack the ship, run final checks, get range clearance, and be truly ready for Flight 12. Pushing everything into April just makes total sense. Better safe than sorry. And hold on, we've mostly been talking about Booster 19 so far. There's another huge piece of the puzzle affecting the launch schedule, Ship 39. SpaceX dropped an early update on X, and it's pure gold. Ship 39 cryoproof operations complete the first campaign with a next-generation Starship V3. Across several days, engineers tested the vehicle's redesigned propellant system and its structural strength, including squeeze tests, to mimic the forces of future ship catches. This is massive news for anyone following along. Ship 39 just crushed an incredibly tough test campaign at Massey, and it came through with flying colors. Total time on site, about 12 days. It rolled in on February 27th, stayed through early March 8th. During that window, it nailed 3 full cryogenic proof tests, plus all the supporting checks, structural strength verification, and those squeeze tests simulating catch forces. Everything passed clean. That means SpaceX has successfully ironed out the propellant and structural issues that popped up on version 2. No more surprises there. V3 hardware is looking rock solid. Right now, Ship 39 is back in Mega Bay 2. She's been lifted onto a work stand. You can tell because the cryo stand rolled away and the doors are closed. Next up, installing Raptor 3 engines. Will they go straight to the full 6? Or start partial, maybe just 2, 1 sea level and 1 vacuum, like they did with Booster 19 for incremental testing. Honestly, partial seems very likely. With Flight 12 already shifted to April, they've got breathing room to take it step by step. A little delay is no big deal at all. As long as this flight nails it, hits all those key milestones SpaceX is chasing. Clean V3 debut solid, Pad 2. Ops reliable new propellant system. Path cleared for catches and refueling. That's what counts. Now, for a fun question. When do you think Flight 12 will actually happen? My guess is April 10th. What about you? Drop your prediction down in the comments below. Speaking of Ship 39, one of the most striking features on this vehicle is the appearance of large snaking pipes running right between the rear flap and the main body of the spacecraft. These pipes are fairly big, and they weave through that section in a complex, almost serpentine pattern. This is very likely part of an active cooling system, specifically designed for the gap between the flap and the fuselage. And that area is not just any structural joint. It has consistently been one of the hottest and most vulnerable zones during re-entry. Now we've also got some very fresh updates about Ship 40. Ship 40 has been coming together at an incredible pace. The full stacking process wrapped up in just 30 days inside Mega Bay 2. If you count from the moment the nose cone and payload bay sections started stacking, the entire build took only 114 days. Right now, Ship 40 is being prepared for Flight 13, which is expected to be the second flight of Starship version 3. It will likely fly with Booster 20 following Flight 12 with Ship 39. The final and most critical piece, the aft section essentially, the heart of the vehicle where the 6 Raptor 3 engines are mounted, finally appeared and was stacked on Monday, March 2nd. This is by far the most complex part of the ship. It incorporates a long list of version 3 upgrades designed to improve reliability. Now, if you take a closer look at the aft section, something interesting stands out. There are several new, oddly routed pipes twisting their way behind the aerodynamic fairing that protects the aft flaps. These are transfer tubes, mainly methane lines. They are mounted at different angles around the base of the vehicle. The plumbing has been rerouted away from the engine bay to reduce heat soak, make maintenance easier, and solve some of the flap seal issues that appeared in earlier versions of Starship. At the same time, SpaceX has also staged additional hardware on the central work stand inside Mega Bay 2. Both raceways, the cable routing channels along the body of the ship, were lifted into position starting on March 3rd, ready for installation. But here's the surprising part. The team also moved both aft flaps into the same work area. At first, many observers assumed they would be installed immediately less than 24 hours after the aft section was stacked onto the vehicle. But that's not what happened. Instead, the flaps were placed upright at the central workstation right next to the raceways. What we're seeing here is a really clever process optimization, as the version 3 production line continues to evolve. By lifting Ship 40 onto the central workstand, just once the team can install both aft flaps and the raceways in a single smooth sequence. The left flap went on March 3rd, the right flap followed on March 4th. This approach saves valuable crane time, reduces risk, and speeds up the overall outfitting process. The result is that Ship 40 is now structurally complete. The flaps are installed and the vehicle is ready for the next steps: engine installation, final, plumbing, avionics, integration, heat shield, tile work, and eventually the full cryo test campaign. Finally, one more update that's just as fascinating. SpaceX is now testing and installing a new type of white ceramic tile for Starship's heat shield, primarily on the nose cone along the leeward side, the area that faces lower aerodynamic heating during re-entry. These bright white hexagonal tiles were first spotted during assembly at Star Factory in early March 2026. Photos show them temporarily held in place with black tape and marked with inspection labels appearing alongside or even replacing sections of the classic black tiles. Unlike the black tiles engineered for the windward side, where re-entry temperatures soar to extreme levels, these white ones are optimized for lower heat zones. They provide superior protection against micrometeoroids and orbital debris while reflecting sunlight far more effectively. That white coating is a game changer for long-duration missions in space. By bouncing back solar radiation, it cuts down on heat absorption, reducing propellant boil-off, and keeping liquid fuel stable in the tanks, crucial for orbital propellant depots or the human landing system in NASA's Artemis program, where Starship might loiter in space for weeks or months. Just picture it, a future Starship shedding its signature black look for a sleek, fully white exterior covered in these gleaming tiles. That would be an absolutely stunning sight. Booster 19, the Block 3 version of Superheavy, has just marked a major milestone in aerospace. On March 10th, 2026, SpaceX successfully carried out its first cryogenic fueling test at Pad 2 in Starbase. This was the very first operation on the newly completed Launchpad, and a key step toward Flight 12, the mission expected to debut the Block 3 Starship. To understand how significant this moment really is, it helps to look at what actually happened during the test. Early in the morning, SpaceX began testing the new grid fins. These upgraded fins include lifting pins, and venting from the propellant tanks quickly filled the site with deep rumbling sounds. Thick white plumes rolled across the pad as gases were released during the fueling sequence. The operation began with a chill-down phase. This step cools the tanks and propellant lines to cryogenic temperatures, preventing rapid boil-off once the super-cold propellants start flowing. After that, liquid oxygen, or LOX, and liquid methane, LCH4, were pumped in from the new tank farm at Pad 2. The pumping and deep chill capacity here is roughly double what Pad 1 can deliver. As a result, the main LOX loading phase for the booster took just about 30 minutes. And remember, the Superheavy booster carries an enormous amount of propellant, roughly 3,400 to 3,650 tons in total. That includes about 2,700 to 3,000 tons of LOX and around 700 tons of liquid methane. During the process, frost spread across almost the entire booster, a clear sign that the methane tank stretches all the way up to the grid fin section. Once the tanks were filled, the system quickly moved into a pressure venting phase. There is also a possibility that SpaceX performed a spin prime test, spinning the turbopumps without ignition to check their behavior. But what surprised many observers was just how smoothly the entire operation went. And then came the numbers. After analyzing the data, SpaceX found something remarkable. The fueling rate was described as insane. Average flow reached around 100 to 120 tons per minute, and at peak moments it may have exceeded 1.5 to 2 tons per second. That sets a new record not only for Starship, but possibly for any vehicle SpaceX has ever operated. The entire tanking process for Booster 19 took just 30 minutes. To put that into perspective, Booster 16 on Pad 1 needed about 40 to 45 minutes just to complete the main LOX loading for the booster, and roughly 3 hours for the full fueling sequence. With Booster 19, those numbers drop to 30 minutes and about 2.5 hours, and the comparison becomes even more striking when you look at Falcon 9. That rocket carries only around 400 to 500 tons of propellant, a mix of LOX and RP1. Yet its fueling process before launch also takes about 30 minutes. In other words, SpaceX just managed to move nearly 10 times more propellant in roughly the same amount of time. That's an absolutely insane number. So, how did they reach that kind of speed? The answer is actually quite straightforward. When SpaceX built Launchpad 2, they integrated a series of upgrades directly into the ground systems. The goal: optimize propellant flow from start to finish. The entire fueling process revolves around three key stages: chill down propellant loading from the tank farm through the quick disconnect into the vehicle, and finally the top-off phase followed by QD detachment just before liftoff. Let's walk through each part. First comes subchilling, or deep propellant cooling. This is one of the core technologies that saw major upgrades at Pad 2. The tank farm now includes large subcooler systems designed to chill the propellant close to its freezing point. That increases density by roughly 10 to 15% compared with normal cryogenic temperatures. Denser propellant flows more smoothly and allows faster loading without forming vapor bubbles that could cause cavitation and disrupt the pumps. Pad 2 also doubled its pumping and chilling capability compared with Pad 1, allowing much higher flow rates throughout the fueling operation. The next upgrade involves the pump infrastructure itself. Pad 2 does not fully share the same propellant systems as Pad 1. Instead, it has a dedicated pump farm located at the tank farm section closest to Pad 2. This pad has its own LOX and liquid methane pumps along with dedicated subcoolers. Interestingly, the configuration is different from Pad 1. The original pad uses 5 LOX pumps with 8 subcoolers and 4 methane pumps with 4 subcoolers. Pad 2 actually uses fewer subcoolers, but they are much larger and more powerful. In total, there are just 3 units, 2 for LOX and 1 for methane. This design reflects lessons learned from dozens of previous tests. It also works together with larger supply lines and a significantly upgraded subcooling capacity. Another major improvement is at the vehicle interface. Pad 2 now uses 2 booster quick disconnects, or BQDs, instead of the single unit used at Pad 1. These connectors also feature extended hoods designed to support the new plumbing layout. The result is faster connections and fewer bottlenecks where the ground system meets the vehicle. It allows propellant to flow more directly and much more efficiently into the booster. But the ground systems are only part of the story. The vehicle itself has also been redesigned. Superheavy V3 introduces a new propellant distribution architecture. One major change is the removal of the large central LOX transfer tube that previously ran through the oxygen tank in earlier versions. In its place, SpaceX installed a much larger methane downcomer tube. Its diameter is roughly comparable to the Falcon 9 booster. This wider downcomer allows methane to be delivered more efficiently to the 33 Raptor 3 engines at the base of the booster. It also reduces turbulence pressure drop and cavitation during high-speed fueling. At the same time, the LOX landing tank has been relocated. Instead of surrounding the transfer tube as before, it is now mounted to the side as a header tank. This improves reliability during landing by reducing the risk of propellant sloshing or engine starvation in the final phase of descent. And indirectly, it also simplifies the plumbing system on the ground, making it easier to maintain stable propellant flow during rapid loading. Version 3 also carries more propellant overall. The tanks have been stretched, especially the methane tank, to maintain the correct oxygen-to-fuel ratio. Total propellant capacity now sits around 3,400 to 3,650 tons, compared with roughly 3,200 to 3,400 tons on Block 2. In other words, the booster now holds even more propellant, yet it still manages to complete LOX loading faster than the previous generation. That's classic SpaceX. When they upgrade something, they rarely improve just one part. They upgrade the entire system from the launch pad to the rocket itself. So is shaving fueling down to just a few dozen minutes really that important? Absolutely. In fact, it could be one of the most critical breakthroughs for Starship. Right now, Starship launches are still spaced months apart. But in February 2026, Elon Musk publicly stated on X that within the next 3 years, SpaceX aims to reach a launch cadence of 1 flight every hour. Some days could even see more than 24 launches within 24 hours. That kind of pace is simply impossible without rapid propellant loading. If fueling remains slow, a booster that has just been caught by Mechazilla would have to sit on the ground for hours waiting to be refueled. That alone would turn the entire launch system into a bottleneck. But if fueling takes only around 25 minutes, combined with streamlined ground operations, the turnaround time from landing to the next launch drops dramatically. That opens the door for hundreds of Starship flights every year. And even small time savings add up quickly. Saving just 10 minutes per flight might not sound like much. But over 24 launches in a single day, that becomes 240 minutes. Small improvements, when multiplied across an entire launch system, can turn into something extraordinary. But why fly that often in the first place? It certainly is not just about launching Starlink satellites. The real goal is orbital refueling. That capability is the key that would allow Starship to fly directly to the Moon or even to Mars. And each of those missions could require 5 to 10 tanker flights delivering propellant in orbit. That means Starships launching back-to-back in rapid succession. If each tanker needs only about 25 minutes for fueling on the ground, followed by a few hours to rendezvous in orbit, an entire refueling campaign could be completed in just a few days instead of the weeks many current estimates suggest. And this is exactly the technology that NASA is relying on for Artemis 3. The entire mission architecture depends on orbital refueling. If that capability is delayed, the schedule for the whole Artemis program could slip by years. There is another major impact as well. The more Starship flies, the lower the cost becomes. SpaceX's long-term goal is to push launch costs down to around $10 per kilogram to orbit. At that price, access to space would become dramatically cheaper, something even NASA and China would find hard to ignore. Once rapid turnaround becomes routine fast, fueling directly reduces time on the ground, lowers operational costs, and increases flight frequency. In effect, it could turn Starship into a true space freight truck, cheaper to operate than today's cargo aircraft. In short, what Booster 19 just demonstrated on Pad 2 suggests that this vision is no longer a distant dream. It is beginning to happen right now. But there is one major challenge. Faster fueling and rapid Starship turnaround also mean a massive increase in propellant demand. Without a new solution, every launch could require dozens of tanker trucks lining up to refill the tank farm, creating serious traffic congestion around the site. To solve this, SpaceX is building its own Air Separation Unit, or ASU, right at Starbase. An ASU is essentially a large industrial facility designed to extract and liquefy gases directly from the atmosphere. Instead of hauling huge amounts of liquid oxygen and liquid nitrogen to the launch site by truck, SpaceX will be able to produce them on site. For a vehicle as large and propellant-hungry as Starship, this represents a major shift in how operations are managed. The ASU is being built along Highway 4, across from the orbital launch pads near the new roundabout and facing the main launch complex. Its location has been carefully planned. By placing the facility outside the highest risk blast zones, SpaceX improves overall safety, while keeping it close enough to efficiently pipe the gases into the tank farm. The idea is simple: separate heavy industrial gas production from the launch pads while avoiding long transport distances. Construction of the ASU is expected to take roughly 8 to 12 months from the start of work. That means the facility could become operational sometime toward the end of this year. So, stay tuned. And if you have not subscribed to the channel, yet consider supporting us with a subscription so you do not miss the latest updates. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. The heat shield system on any spacecraft plays an absolutely critical role. You could even think of it as a guardian that protects the lives of astronauts. Without a heat shield, a spacecraft returning to Earth after completing its mission would simply burn up in the atmosphere, almost like the meteors we occasionally see streaking across the night sky. The reason is simple. During re-entry, the vehicle slams into the atmosphere at speeds of tens of thousands of kilometers per hour, creating temperatures that can reach several thousand degrees Celsius due to extreme aerodynamic heating. Even for uncrewed spacecraft, the heat shield is just as important. It allows the vehicle to survive re-entry and be reused multiple times instead of flying only once. That capability dramatically reduces mission costs, which is why heat shields have gradually become an essential element across the entire aerospace industry. And SpaceX's Starship is no exception. The vehicle is protected by a ceramic-based heat shield covered with 18,000 black tiles. These tiles typically use a borosilicate glass coating with black pigment similar in concept to the reaction-cured glass, or RCG, used on the space shuttle. The dark surface provides high emissivity, allowing the vehicle to radiate heat away efficiently after it has been engulfed in plasma during the most intense phase of atmospheric re-entry. SpaceX has been maintaining and steadily improving this black ceramic tile system for about 3 years now. But recently something interesting has started to change. A camera operated by the photographer Starship Gazer, positioned near Starbase, captured images showing that SpaceX had installed a set of white heat shield tiles, a completely new type of thermal protection tile on the nose cone of Starship Ship 45 inside Star Factory. What makes this even more intriguing is the way they were installed. The tiles were already placed onto the mounting pins, but they appeared to be only temporarily secured with black tape. And instead of replacing the black tiles entirely, these white tiles were installed right alongside them. That suggests Ship 45, which is expected to fly on Flight 16, could be the vehicle where we finally see a real flight test of this new white heat shield system. But here's something that might seem a little strange. Based on both physics and decades of past experience, black heat shield tiles are usually superior in regions exposed to extreme heat. During atmospheric re-entry, the surface temperature of the tiles can surge to 1,200 to 1,650 degrees Celsius, sometimes even higher, mainly due to the intense plasma generated by compressed air in front of the vehicle. At those temperatures, the dominant cooling mechanism is not conduction or convection. It is thermal radiation. According to the Stefan-Boltzmann law, the power radiated away scales with emissivity multiplied by temperature to the fourth power, and black tiles typically have 2 to 3 times higher emissivity than white tiles. White tiles are different because they are designed with higher reflectivity, allowing them to reflect more sunlight and absorb less solar heat while the spacecraft is in orbit. But if you place white tiles in the hottest parts of the vehicle, they can retain heat longer. The surface temperature could climb higher and potentially exceed the material limits. History has already shown what can happen when thermal protection fails. The Space Shuttle Columbia disaster is a stark reminder. That is also why the Space Shuttle used black tiles on the nose and belly, the areas exposed to the most intense heating during re-entry, while white thermal protection was placed on the upper surfaces where the heat loads were much lower. So, could SpaceX eventually install white tiles on the dorsal side of Starship, the upper surface of the vehicle? It's not impossible. But right now, another theory is gaining traction. Many observers believe these white tiles may actually be designed for Starship HLS, the lunar landing version of Starship. This view might ruffle some feathers because HLS is purely an ascent vehicle. It launches from the moon and never comes back to Earth. So why would it need a heat shield at all? And honestly, that's not wrong. Let me break it down for you. Reliable sources, including SpaceX's own updates, put it plainly. Unlike the standard Starship spacecraft, both the Starship HLS and the depot variants never re-enter Earth's atmosphere. That means we can completely strip away the heavy atmospheric heat shield, the black tiles, and the aerodynamic control surfaces like flaps. Huge mass savings right there. But hold on, these are still massive vehicles wrapped in a thin stainless steel skin, not exactly paper thin, but definitely not armored like a tank. Now check out SpaceX's official HLS update on their website. They just hit a major milestone: micrometeoroid and orbital debris testing of shielding insulation, and window panels analyzing different material stack-ups that will be used to protect Starship from impact hazards and harsh thermal conditions. See what that means? The white heat shield tiles we've been spotting, like the ones they're quietly installing on Ship 45's nose cone, are part of exactly those tests for HLS. They're running real-world experiments right now on prototypes. For HLS and depot ships, black re-entry tiles aren't needed, but white heat shield or reflective insulation and coatings are absolutely critical. They protect against micrometeoroids and small debris impacts during long missions in space. And for HLS, in particular, it's even more vital because the vehicle has to land and stay on the lunar surface for extended periods, baking under intense direct sunlight with wild temperature swings, daytime highs over plus 120 degrees Celsius, plunging to minus 223 degrees Celsius at night. Physically, here's how the white layer works so effectively. First, it has super low solar absorptance, usually under 0.1 to 0.2, and sky-high reflectivity over 90 to 98% in visible and near-infrared light. That means the white surface bounces back almost all incoming solar energy, about 1,367 watts per square meter, plus reflected light from the lunar regolith, which has a high albedo. Heat barely gets absorbed into the ship, totally different from a dark surface or bare steel that soaks it up. Think of it like this: put a black shirt and a white shirt out in the sun. The white one stays cooler and takes forever to heat up because it reflects sunlight instead of absorbing it. Same principle here. The result? Surface temperatures stay way lower, slashing boil-off of cryogenic propellants that would otherwise evaporate from heat. That's a massive win for long-duration storage or waiting to ascend back to orbit. Second, these white materials usually have high emissivity over 0.8 to 0, 9 in the thermal infrared range. So any excess heat the ship does pick up gets radiated right back out into space, following the Stefan-Boltzmann law, achieving passive thermal balance without fancy active cooling systems. Layer that with multi-layer insulation or tougher ceramic composites, and you've got solid protection against hypervelocity micrometeoroid impacts, spreading out the energy and cutting thermal stress. Bottom line, for Starship HLS, white heat shield isn't optional. It's essential to survive the moon's brutal environment, keep propellant stable, and make the whole Artemis mission reliable. Exciting stuff happening right now. Now let's talk about the material itself. At first glance, these white tiles don't look much different from the traditional black ones. So are they made from the same material? Pretty much, yeah. SpaceX keeps the core the same, a porous silica ceramic base, just like the black tiles. That's what gives them the low-density killer insulation and shock resistance we need. The real magic happens in the coating. For black tiles, it's a dark pigment blend that cranks up emissivity for screaming hot re-entry. For white ones, they swap in silica compounds mixed with aluminum oxide or other bright white additives to flip the properties high, reflectivity for bouncing solar heat away, perfect for long orbital coasts or lunar ops. How do they pull this off without starting from scratch? Simple, they're building on proven shuttle-era tech. The manufacturing process is basically the same mix: silica fibers into a slurry mold. The hexagons dry them, then fire at insane temps to sinter everything without melting. After that, it's just a coating tweak. Change the pigment in the glass, slurry black for max heat radiation. During re-entry, white for max solar reflection in space. They might throw in a bit extra alumina borosilicate or a thicker outer layer on the white versions to beef up MMOD resistance, since those are headed for longer missions with more debris risk. It's cheap scales like crazy and lets them test fast. And remember those early Starship explosions where tiles flew off and drifted everywhere? Yeah, pieces washed up on beaches near Boca Chica, even as far as Mexico. People scooped them up and turned them into collectibles, selling intact ones or fragments on the internet for anywhere from a few dozen bucks to thousands. One went for over $3,000, another hit $7,500. Wild, right? Turning rocket failures into a side hustle. Talk about smart entrepreneurship. All right, moving on to some fresh news. And oh boy, the drama between Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos is heating up again. This is peak rivalry stuff. Elon with SpaceX and Starlink versus Jeff with Amazon. Specifically their satellite project, Amazon LEO, better known as Project Kuiper. Let me break the story down, step by step. It started in late January 2026 when SpaceX filed with the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, asking approval for a massive constellation of up to 1 million satellites. This isn't just another Starlink upgrade. The idea is to build orbital data centers, huge computing systems operating in space and powered by solar energy, perfect for AI workloads. And in a world dealing with wars or chaos, all you need is power, and you still have the internet. No vulnerable ground cables. That's why many people say Elon's influence is reaching deeper into US strategy and politics. Amazon wasn't about to let that slide. Last Friday, around March 6th or 7th, 2026, Amazon LEO submitted a 17-page petition to the FCC, basically asking the commission to reject SpaceX's application outright. Their arguments focus on 3 points. First, the plan looks too speculative. SpaceX's filing is missing key technical details such as orbital parameters, RF, frequencies, space safety measures, and debris mitigation. The FCC has rejected incomplete proposals like this before. Second, the timeline looks impossible. Using the record launch year 2025, only about 4,526 satellites reached orbit globally. At that pace, launching 1 million satellites would take centuries, even if SpaceX used every rocket available. Third, approving this could allow SpaceX to lock up orbital slots and resources, making it harder for other constellations, including Project Kuiper, to expand. In short, this is classic big player competition. Bezos and Amazon are using the FCC process to slow down or block SpaceX's mega constellation plans, while Musk keeps pushing Starship to make launching thousands of satellites cheaper and faster than ever. Wild times in the space race. So, what do you think, Musk playing big or Amazon playing defense? On March 10th, the NASA Office of Inspector General released a roughly 50-page report titled NASA's Management of the Human Landing System Contracts. The goal of the report is to review and evaluate the Human Landing System, or HLS, contracts that NASA has awarded to SpaceX and Blue Origin. But almost immediately after the document went public, people noticed a major piece of drama buried inside. It reveals a growing disagreement between NASA and SpaceX, and it directly involves the Starship HLS. At the center of the debate is a key question. Does SpaceX's proposed lunar landing approach for Starship HLS actually meet the intent of NASA's manual control requirement? According to the report, the situation is not moving in a good direction. The issue comes down to philosophy. When SpaceX developed the SpaceX Dragon, the company designed it to be highly autonomous. Dragon can dock with a space station automatically, with astronauts mostly supervising the process through touchscreen displays. SpaceX wants to apply a similar concept to Starship HLS. Their plan is to rely on a fully automated control system monitored through touchscreens, allowing the vehicle to handle complex operations on its own, from docking with Orion to eventually landing on the moon. NASA, however, is not fully on board with that approach. On page 4 of the report, in the section titled What We Found, the document clearly states that NASA and SpaceX disagree on whether the provider is meeting the intent of the agency's manual control requirement. In other words, NASA wants Starship HLS to include true manual control capability. Astronauts must be able to override the automated system and directly control the spacecraft's trajectory at any stage of the mission, especially during the critical final descent to the lunar surface. NASA points to history as the reason for this requirement. During all 7 crewed lunar landing missions of the Apollo program, astronauts had to rely on manual control at some point. For example, during missions like Apollo 11, Apollo 12, Apollo 14, Apollo 16, and Apollo 17 crews had to take over from the computer because the terrain at the planned landing sites turned out to be too dangerous. NASA also points to a more recent example. During testing of Boeing's Boeing Starliner, the vehicle experienced problems during docking, and manual control played a critical role in allowing the spacecraft to successfully reach the ISS. Yes, those arguments are certainly convincing, but SpaceX, under the leadership of Elon Musk, has its own strong views on the matter. First of all, the software and computing power available today are worlds apart from what existed during the era of the Apollo program. Back then, the onboard computer had only about 4 kilobytes of RAM. Its processing speed was slower than even the earliest basic mobile phones. The system could calculate basic trajectories, but it could not dynamically adjust in real time using sensor data. Because of that limitation, astronauts often had to step in manually to avoid hazards or fine-tune the landing. SpaceX argues that modern flight computers are in a completely different league. Their systems use multiple advanced computers with gigabytes of RAM and processing speeds capable of executing trillions of instructions per second. This allows for a very high level of automation, supported by full 3D simulations that can handle complex tasks such as autonomous docking or extremely precise navigation. And this level of automation is not just theoretical. It has already been proven in real missions with Crew Dragon. Most flights of the spacecraft have operated in fully autonomous mode, without astronauts needing to take manual control. In fact, throughout the program's history, there has never been a launch where manual control had to be used in an actual emergency, which SpaceX sees as strong evidence of the reliability of automated systems. Interestingly, this is not the first time NASA and SpaceX have clashed over this issue. A similar debate happened during the design phase of Crew Dragon. At the time, SpaceX wanted to rely entirely on touchscreen controls to simplify and modernize the cockpit interface. Meanwhile, NASA preferred physical joysticks, arguing that they provide tactile feedback and are more familiar to pilots trained on traditional spacecraft. In the end, the two sides reached a compromise. Manual control was allowed through the touchscreen interface using what many described as a video game-style system, where roll, pitch, and yaw are controlled through virtual buttons. Astronauts such as Doug Hurley later explained that the system works well, but it requires very deliberate and precise inputs from the crew. However, Starship presents a completely different challenge. The Starship stands about 50 meters tall and 9 meters wide. Manually controlling such a vehicle during landing would be extremely difficult. The spacecraft relies on a complex propulsion system powered by 6 Raptor engines, including 3 vacuum-optimized engines and 3 sea-level engines. During the final descent, Starship performs a retro-propulsion landing burn. In this phase, human reaction time may simply not be fast enough to manage the vehicle at that scale. The landing profile also involves a so-called suicide burn, a short but powerful engine burn just seconds before touchdown. The timing must be accurate down to milliseconds to avoid a crash or loss of control. Under those conditions, manual control could introduce serious risks. Pilots might accidentally trigger pilot-induced oscillations or expose the vehicle to extreme thermal loads caused by plume interaction with the surface. And the lunar environment makes things even more complicated. With almost no atmosphere on the Moon, aerodynamic stability is minimal, which further increases the challenge of controlling a massive spacecraft like Starship during the final moments of landing. And here's the surprising part. Up to this point, neither SpaceX nor NASA has actually settled this disagreement. Both sides are now moving closer to the Critical Design Review, or CDR. This is a major technical milestone that determines whether the design of the Starship HLS is mature enough to move forward into full manufacturing and system testing. If the issue is not resolved before the CDR, the design could effectively be locked in, with automation as the only landing method. But here's the ironic part. The same report also clearly states that incorporating manual control capability is a key element of the human rating certification for HLS. In other words, NASA cannot certify Starship HLS as safe for astronauts unless that manual control option exists. And without human rating certification, the future missions of the Artemis program could face serious trouble. Missions like Artemis 4 and Artemis 5 would simply not be able to move forward. It's not entirely clear whether this disagreement is the reason, but NASA has also stated that SpaceX's lunar lander will likely not be ready for a moon landing in June 2027. That said, it may not be all bad news. In a way, it gives everyone a little more time to prepare and make sure the system is truly ready for such a critical mission. So, what do you think about this situation? Do you agree more with NASA's position or with SpaceX's approach? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episodes. Now, let's move on to a more exciting update from Starbase, where Superheavy V3 has just gone through a series of important tests. In the afternoon on the 9th, the chopsticks finally let go. Of B-19 lifted up the tower, and Booster 19's grid fins got their wiggle test. It's a chill check, kinda, like rotating your arms in a warm-up stretch. For B-19, it's all about making sure those actuators respond smoothly, with no sticking or weird shakes in sight. And right after the flap tests wrapped up, you know what SpaceX did next? They fired off 3 back-to-back DSS tests at Pad 2 that evening. DSS stands for Detonation Suppression System, the safety setup that sprays a mix of water plus nitrogen right under the orbital launch mount to dilute oxygen and any flammable vapors, basically killing the risk of flashback or a methane-oxygen boom during Raptor engine ignition. At first, many people assumed these tests were preparing for a static fire the following day. After all, SpaceX had already issued a beach closure notice starting at 8 a.m. on March 10th, then around 6 a.m. That morning, the Starbase tank farm began venting continuously, which only made everyone even more excited. But that was not actually what happened. Instead, SpaceX simply loaded propellant into Superheavy Booster 19. You could clearly see the surface of the rocket turning white as frost formed along the stainless steel body. After that, the propellant was vented back out, sending huge clouds of white vapor rolling around the tank farm. Some sources believe this may have been a spin prime test. In that procedure, the turbopumps inside the engines are spun up using high-pressure nitrogen or helium. The engines do not ignite. The goal is simply to bring the pumps up to speed and verify their behavior. However, it is still hard to confirm exactly what happened. The water deluge system was active during the operation, and the massive columns of water made it difficult to clearly see what was going on around the engines. Either way, the test appears to have been completed successfully with no reported issues, and based on current expectations, the first static fire test could be coming very soon. Meanwhile, in another major development, Vast Space, the company developing Haven, one has just received a favorable payload determination from the Federal Aviation Administration after a multi-agency review involving NASA and several U.S. national security agencies. In simple terms, this means the FAA has confirmed that Haven 1 is safe and appropriate to launch as a payload. That decision clears the way for the module to fly aboard a Falcon 9 in the first quarter of 2027. This is a major milestone for VAST. It brings the company one step closer to its long-term goal of building the world's first commercial space station, helping maintain a continuous human presence in low Earth orbit after the International Space Station eventually retires. But VAST is not the only player making progress. Another commercial station project, Starlab, has also reached an important milestone. On March 10th, 2026, during the Q4 2025 financial report, Voyager Space CEO Dylan Taylor revealed that Starlab has already fully booked its commercial payload capacity. In other words, all available space for research institutions and private companies has already been sold. That is a strong signal that private sector demand for orbital research is growing quickly, especially as the retirement of the ISS approaches. Back in 2019, NASA had extremely ambitious plans for returning to the moon. In addition to Mobile Launcher 1, the platform currently used to transport the SLS block, one rocket to the pad, the agency decided to build an even more advanced launch platform called Mobile Launcher 2. This new launcher was designed to support the more powerful versions of the Space Launch System, specifically the SLS Block 1B. That upgrade would dramatically increase payload capability to lunar orbit, raising it from roughly 27 tons to more than 38 tons. Since then, construction of ML2 has reached about 90% completion. The final major module was installed by contractor Bechtel last summer. If you followed the rollout of the SLS rocket ahead of its wet dress rehearsal, you might have noticed ML2 standing not far from the vehicle assembly building. That is where crews have been finishing the structure, and visually it looks almost perfect, like a launch tower ready to enter service any day. But behind that polished exterior lies a development story many experts describe bluntly as a project management disaster. When NASA first signed the contract with Bechtel in 2019, the price tag was estimated at about $383 million, with delivery expected in 2023. Reality turned out very different. Costs kept climbing, eventually exceeding $1 billion. Some deeper analyses suggest the total has already reached around $1.8 billion, with delays stretching all the way into late 2026. And if the project is fully completed, the final cost could climb as high as $2.7 billion. Just think about that for a moment. A 3-year delay, costs exploding by nearly 600%. Is that really acceptable, especially when the money ultimately comes from taxpayers who are already paying enormous amounts to fund these programs? But there is an even more shocking truth that makes this story harder to accept. You might be thinking, well, the project is already delayed and massively over budget, so the best option is to just finish it and avoid wasting all that investment. That sounds reasonable, but in this case, it turns out to be wrong. Recently, NASA announced that the agency is no longer planning to use the Exploration Upper Stage or Mobile Launcher 2 because development of both systems has faced significant delays. This statement came as part of a major restructuring of the Artemis program, which NASA revealed at the end of February. The core reason is a strategic shift. NASA has decided to drop the plan to transition to SLS Block 1B. Instead, the agency will keep the rocket in a configuration close to the current Block 1 version. NASA believes this approach will help control costs, keep production focused, and avoid stretching resources too thin by trying to develop and manage too many upgrades at the same time. By doing that, NASA hopes to significantly increase launch cadence. The gap between missions could shrink from roughly 3 years to about 10 months. That could allow Artemis 2 to fly sooner, while Artemis 3 and Artemis 4 may also move forward much faster. But this new direction comes with a serious trade-off. Mobile Launcher 2 was specifically designed to handle the enormous thrust and structural loads of the Block 1B rocket, and to support the more advanced missions planned for later in the program. Now, with that rocket configuration no longer part of the roadmap, ML2 suddenly becomes something NASA describes as surplus, a massive piece of infrastructure that may no longer have a role at all. So, does this mean Mobile Launcher 2 will be completely canceled? If the project were simply abandoned and the entire structure turned into a pile of scrap metal, it would look like nothing more than billions of dollars thrown out the window. Meanwhile, the people who benefited from the project would continue living comfortably untouched by the consequences. But in reality, that scenario is very unlikely. The tower now stands 377 feet tall, and construction is already close to completion. Many of the complex systems, including major piping networks and umbilical connections, have already been installed. That means the structure still holds real operational value. There is also historical precedent. During the Apollo program, and later the Space Shuttle program, NASA operated 2 mobile launchers in parallel to increase launch cadence. So, the idea of keeping multiple launch platforms active is not unrealistic. In fact, NASA's Associate Administrator, Amit Kshatriya, has hinted that since the launcher is already so close to completion, the agency may look at restructuring or modifying it for other purposes in the future. One possibility is adapting it to support future lunar base construction programs, or even preparing it to handle next-generation, commercial super-heavy rockets down the road. But there is another side to this story. Every modification means more time and more money, and the party that benefits the most from that situation is often the contractor. The ML2 project was built under a cost-plus contract, meaning the contractor is reimbursed for labor materials and then receives additional profit on top. So whether the project continues, changes direction, or gets extended, the contractor has still enjoyed a steady flow of funding for years. Of course, this direction from NASA has sparked a lot of controversy, but it also has strong support from many experts inside the industry. The first reason comes from a lesson repeated throughout the entire history of human spaceflight. The most successful programs, from the Project Mercury to Project Gemini and eventually the Apollo program, all followed a simple principle: keep it simple and fly often. Frequent launches help train the workforce and keep operational skills sharp. Under Administrator Jared Isaacman, NASA appears to be applying that exact philosophy to the Artemis program. Originally, the plan was that after Artemis 3, NASA would transition to the more powerful SLS Block 1B configuration supported by the dedicated Mobile Launcher 2. But that change would introduce a huge number of modifications, new interfaces, new umbilicals, and entirely new operational procedures. In other words, NASA would be trying to carry too many major changes at the same time: a new rocket configuration, a new upper stage, and a new launch platform. Each one introduces new technical issues that must be tested and certified simultaneously. The result is predictable. Risks stack up, costs grow, and the time between launches stretches so long that teams begin to lose what engineers often call their muscle memory. When launches happen only once every few years, teams can forget how to deal with small technical problems quickly. Issues like the helium leak and hydrogen leak that appeared during preparations for Artemis 2 are good examples. And those problems occurred while the rocket was still on the ground. When missions start involving complex operations like landing spacecraft on the moon, the challenges become far more serious. From that perspective, dropping SLS Block 1B and Mobile Launcher 2 starts to look like a rational decision. There is also a second argument behind this strategy. Both Jared Isaacman and Amit Kshatriya have been very clear about it. Launching a complex rocket only once every 3 years is simply not a path to success. By keeping the rocket close to its current Block 1 configuration using the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, or a similar standardized upper stage, NASA removes an entire layer of complexity. After Artemis 3, most missions could fly with nearly identical ascent configurations. That means the launch teams can repeat the same procedures, learn from mistakes, and steadily improve operations without resetting the entire system every few flights. As for the increased launch cadence shifting from one mission every 3 years to roughly every 10 months, this may be the most significant strategic change of all. Under the new schedule, Artemis 3 is now targeted for the middle of 2027. Instead of an immediate lunar landing, that mission will focus on testing rendezvous and docking with the human landing system in Earth orbit. Then comes Artemis 4, planned for early 2028, which is expected to deliver the first crewed lunar landing under this revised roadmap. After that, Artemis 5 would follow in late 2028, marking the second human landing. If that timeline holds, it means that in 2028 alone, NASA could carry out 2 separate crewed missions that actually land astronauts on the moon. That would be a major leap forward compared with the previous plan, which expected only a single lunar landing sometime in 2028, or possibly even later. At that pace, the new cadence could become a decisive factor in NASA's broader goal of staying ahead of China before the end of this decade. The current landscape makes it clear that this competition is intensifying by the day. Beijing has never hidden its ambition to land astronauts on the moon around 2030. For NASA, that date is not just a line on a schedule. Intelligence assessments and public observations both suggest that China is making steady and very deliberate progress. From testing the launch escape system for the Long March 10 to demonstrating impressive reusable rocket technologies, the momentum is clearly building. The urgency to stay ahead of that rival is one of the driving forces behind the major changes recently announced by Jared Isaacman. NASA understands that it no longer has the luxury of an unlimited timeline like the era that followed the Apollo program. The uncomfortable reality is that the gap between the two space powers may now be measured in months, not years. China benefits from a very focused national strategy, one clear objective with far fewer legacy systems or bureaucratic processes slowing things down. NASA, on the other hand, is still wrestling with the complexity of its own massive infrastructure and decades of institutional layers. And the motivation today goes far beyond simply planting a flag and collecting rocks like the early days of lunar exploration. The real objective is maintaining U.S. leadership in deep space exploration and building a long-term sustainable presence on the moon through permanent lunar infrastructure. Isaacman has framed the stakes in very practical terms. After more than 35 years of planning and over $100 billion invested, if the United States fails to return astronauts to the moon before its rival, it would send a troubling signal about national capability. It would suggest that something inside the system is fundamentally broken. But if NASA succeeds, it would reaffirm American leadership in space and once again show the world what the country is capable of achieving. So, what do you think? Are you confident the United States will win this new lunar race? If you are, drop a Go America in the comments below. All right, that's it for today. A huge thank you to everyone who stayed all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. I'll see you again in tomorrow's episode. And if you haven't subscribed yet, don't hesitate to hit that button. Bye. NASA's Space Launch System, or SLS, has long been known for 2 things: an extremely slow production pace and an eye-watering price tag. The rocket is built to support the Artemis program, NASA's series of missions aimed at returning humans to the moon. The program was first announced back in 2017, and nearly 9 years have passed since then. Yet during that entire period, NASA has managed to produce only 2 SLS rockets. One of them launched during Artemis 1 in 2021. The second is currently being prepared for Artemis 2, which NASA says is targeting a launch in April. That means the current production pace works out to a little over 2 years per rocket, and the cost is just as staggering. Estimates suggest it takes around $2.5 billion to build a single SLS. But after just one launch, all that effort from the engineers, along with that enormous investment, is simply gone. The rocket isn't reusable. Contractors have likely already started developing components for the next SLS vehicle, but it's still unclear whether the production speed can actually improve. Recently, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman announced a plan to accelerate the Artemis program. The proposal would cancel development of the SLS Block 1B focus, instead on ramping up production of the Block 1 version and use that configuration for all missions after Artemis 3. The big question is whether that change can truly make a difference. Could it cut production time in half or even by 2/3? For now, no one really knows. Unless NASA already has a backup plan, one that could both shorten the gap between missions to about 10 months and reduce the overall cost. And that would mean replacing SLS with an existing rocket. And if that sounds unrealistic, there is one important fact to remember. Back in 2014, Orion was successfully launched on a Delta IV Heavy during the uncrewed EFT-1 test flight. That mission proved something important. Orion can fly on rockets other than SLS. So, the key question becomes simple. How many rockets today can actually do the job of SLS? Because SLS has one main task. It has to push Orion out of Earth's gravity and place it on a translunar trajectory toward the Moon. That requires a very powerful heavy lift configuration with a payload capacity of more than 27 tons. More importantly, the rocket has to be human-rated because it needs to launch the entire Orion stack, including the European Service Module and the Launch Abort system. Altogether, that system weighs more than 30 tons. And that's why Falcon Heavy from SpaceX ends up just missing the mark. Even though it can send about 26 tons toward the Moon in expendable mode, it still lacks full human rating and comes up slightly short on performance. So, it's not the right vehicle for the job. Next is Superheavy, the most powerful rocket booster ever built. In terms of raw power, there's really no debate. The current version 3 configuration, powered by 33 Raptor 3 engines, produces close to 10,000 tons of thrust. But the system is designed to work with Starship, especially variants like Starship HLS or the Starship Tanker. In other words, it's built around the Starship architecture, not the Orion stack, so it simply isn't compatible with launching Orion, which leaves us with only one realistic candidate right now: New Glenn. This rocket comes from one of SpaceX's biggest competitors, Blue Origin. It was originally developed to compete with Starship. Of course, in terms of raw capability, it is still far behind Starship. But the interesting part is why it might actually fit this role surprisingly well. First, New Glenn has already completed its first 2 test flights successfully. The maiden flight took place in January 2025, followed by NG-2 in November 2025, which also achieved the program's first successful booster landing. Those early milestones suggest the vehicle is moving toward a solid level of reliability. There is another important advantage. New Glenn was designed from the beginning to launch Blue Moon Blue Origin's lunar lander that is being developed for the Artemis program. That system is intended to support human missions to the Moon, so achieving human rating certification for the rocket is considered realistic and it could potentially happen relatively soon. However, the current configuration does have a limitation. Its payload capability to translunar injection, or TLI, is only about 7 tons. That is nowhere near enough to send a fully integrated Orion spacecraft toward the Moon in a single launch. But Blue Origin has already anticipated this issue. Last year in November 2025, the company officially revealed an upgraded version called New Glenn 9x4, a much more powerful Super Heavy class configuration. The booster would use 9 BE-4 engines, increasing total thrust from about 9 million to 4.5 million pounds. The upper stage would be upgraded to 4 BE-3U engines, raising thrust from 320,000 to about 400,000 pounds. The rocket would also use subcooled propellants, a larger 8.7-meter payload fairing, and an overall design optimized for lunar and deep space missions. According to Blue Origin, this configuration could deliver more than 20 tons to TLI in reusable mode. And if the rocket flies in expendable mode, meaning the booster is not recovered and maximum payload is prioritized, the capability could increase significantly. Estimates suggest it might reach around 27 tons to TLI, which would finally provide enough margin to send Orion toward the Moon, using a single launch architecture similar to SLS, without requiring complex in-orbit refueling. The cost difference is just as striking. While a single SLS is estimated to cost around $2.5 billion, a New Glenn rocket is believed to cost somewhere between $150 and $200 million to manufacture. That makes it roughly 12 to 14 times cheaper. So if SLS were to run into serious trouble as an Artemis launch approaches, New Glenn could suddenly emerge as a very compelling replacement candidate. But of course, none of this would be easy. The first challenge would be the payload adapter. Engineers would need to design and build a new adapter, something similar to the Orion stage adapter, to connect the Orion spacecraft to the upper stage of New Glenn, which in the 9x4 configuration uses a large 8.7-meter fairing. Orion itself has a base diameter of about 5 meters, but the full stack, including the launch abort system and the European service module, requires a much larger fairing. This adapter would have to handle a completely different dynamic environment compared with SLS. That includes structural loads, vibration levels, and the intense acoustic environment produced by BE-4 engines and their thrust vectoring. It would also need to provide electrical power and data interfaces between Orion's avionics and New Glenn's guidance system. Developing something like this would require CFD analysis, wind tunnel testing, vibration testing, and eventually full human rating certification. If engineers started from scratch, the process could easily take 1 to 2 years. Lockheed Martin, the manufacturer of Orion, has previously said that launching Orion on another rocket would involve nothing extremely difficult, but it would still require modifications to both the avionics systems and the adapter structure. The second challenge is infrastructure. Artemis missions are currently designed to launch from Launch Complex 39B at Kennedy Space Center. That pad was heavily upgraded specifically for SLS, including the mobile launcher, the flame trench hydrogen infrastructure, the crew access arm, and the entire stacking process inside the vehicle assembly building. New Glenn, on the other hand, is built integrated and launched from Launch Complex 36 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, located roughly 9 to 14 miles away. The pad there was designed around methane and liquid oxygen operations as well as booster recovery. Moving Orion, or even the full Orion stack, to LC-36 would create major logistical challenges. Transportation could require a crawler or a barge. The launch tower at LC-36 is also not optimized for crewed Orion operations. It lacks systems like a white room dedicated facilities for loading hypergolic propellants used by the ESM and LAS, and emergency egress systems for astronauts. Because of that, large modifications to the ground systems would be required if New Glenn were to support Orion launches. Using Pad 39B for New Glenn would also be difficult, since Artemis infrastructure there is heavily optimized for SLS, and NASA intends to preserve that configuration. There is another complication as well. If an Artemis mission required New Glenn to launch Orion toward TLY or NRHO, while also launching Blue Moon, Blue Origin's lunar lander, the mission could require at least 2 New Glenn launches within a short time window to allow rendezvous near the Moon. Right now, Blue Origin operates only one primary launch pad at LC-36, where integration and refurbishment are performed on site. The launch cadence is expected to increase gradually after 2026, following additional successful flights. But the current system is not designed for rapid multi-launch campaigns. Booster refurbishment, propellant loading, and range scheduling at Cape Canaveral could all introduce delays. That would complicate mission timing, increase operational risk, and likely require additional launch pads or parallel operations. Blue Origin is scaling up production, but for now, there is still no second pad ready to support an Artemis-level launch cadence. In general, the idea is technically possible, but even if it were adopted, it would still take time to implement. It's not clear whether this is connected to broader changes inside the Artemis program, but there has also been a notable shift in plans for the International Space Station. Recently, the U.S. Senate Commerce Committee approved the NASA Authorization Act of 2026, a bill that proposes extending the life of the ISS by 2 more years, from the end of 2030 to September 30th, 2032. This is not NASA's final decision yet. It is guidance from Congress, led by Ted Cruz and Maria Cantwell, aimed at avoiding a potential gap in low Earth orbit operations during the transition to commercial space stations. NASA is still negotiating with international partners, including Russia, Japan, and Europe, because the ISS is not owned by the United States alone. Any extension would require agreement from all participating agencies. Because of that, projects related to future space stations are getting a lot of attention right now. One example is VAST, The company recently raised $500 million in new funding to accelerate development of its Haven 2 station. Their current plan is to launch the first module around 2028, with the full station targeted for completion by 2032. Before that, Haven 1 will serve as a Pathfinder mission expected to launch sometime between 2026 and 2027 on a Falcon 9. And NASA has already selected VAST for its 6th private astronaut mission to the ISS, currently planned for sometime after 2020.